I sat in silence at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant my parents chose for celebrating my sister Emma's law school graduation, watching them toast her acceptance to the most prestigious law firm in Manhattan with a starting salary of $150,000 per year. My father raised his wine glass high, his voice booming across the dining room, as he declared, "Finally, we have one child who won't embarrass us in front of the neighbors." His eyes found mine across the table, cold and dismissive. My mother nodded enthusiastically, adding with a sharp edge to her voice, "Emma proves what real dedication looks like, unlike certain people who quit college to play with computers all day." Every patron in the restaurant turned to stare as my parents continued their public humiliation, berating me for dropping out of engineering school 2 years ago. I gripped my phone tightly, knowing it contained a secret that would change everything. The dinner at Romano's wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 6 months of escalating tension that had been building ever since Emma received her job offer. Every single day brought new comparisons, new reminders of how I'd supposedly failed the family name while she soared to incredible heights. 2 years earlier, I'd made the decision to leave mechanical engineering at State University. The coursework felt like torture, studying stress calculations and thermodynamics, when all I wanted to do was understand how computer systems worked. Late at night in my dorm room, while my roommates slept, I taught myself programming languages and cybersecurity protocols. I discovered vulnerabilities in the university's own network and quietly reported them to the IT department. The rush of solving those digital puzzles felt more exciting than any engineering problem I'd ever encountered. My parents reacted to my dropout announcement like I'd committed a felony. Dad stormed around the house for weeks telling anyone who would listen that his son had thrown away a perfectly good education. Mom stopped mentioning me entirely when neighbors asked about her children's progress. They'd spent $17,000 on my tuition that first year, and according to them, I'd flushed every penny down the drain. Emma, meanwhile, had been the golden child since elementary school, valedictorian of her high school class, editor of the law review at her university, president of the mock trial team. She graduated summa cum laude and immediately landed a position at Hartwell Morrison and Associates, the kind of firm that only hired from Ivy League schools. Her engagement to Trevor Whitman, a successful investment banker whose family owned vacation homes in the Hamptons, only added to her perfect image. During family gatherings, the script never changed. Uncle Richard would ask about our careers, and Dad would launch into Emma's accomplishments while I sat there like invisible furniture. Emma's representing major corporations now. He'd beam. She's handling cases worth millions of dollars. Then the inevitable pause before someone awkwardly asked what I was doing with my time. The truth was, I'd been building something extraordinary in our garage. After dropping out, I moved back home and converted the space into a makeshift office. I spent 16 hours a day learning advanced cybersecurity techniques, studying how hackers infiltrated corporate networks, and developing software to prevent those intrusions. I created detection systems that could identify threats faster than anything currently available in the market. While Emma planned her elaborate engagement party, I worked on penetration testing tools that could scan entire corporate infrastructures for vulnerabilities. While she shopped for designer wedding dresses, I built encryption protocols that could protect financial institutions from ransomware attacks. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was preparing to defend companies in court while I was actually protecting them from digital threats. My parents had no idea what I was creating in that garage. To them, I was just their unemployed son who'd given up on a real career. They told neighbors I was taking a gap year to figure out my direction, too ashamed to admit their child had become what they considered a college dropout. Emma tried to help in her own condescending way. She'd sit me down for guidance sessions where she explained how important it was to have concrete goals and measurable achievements. You can't just drift through life expecting opportunities to find you. She'd lecture completely unaware that I was working towards something bigger than anything she could imagine. The worst part was watching them drain their savings account to fund Emma's perfect life. They'd already spent $30,000 on her engagement party, alone hiring an event coordinator and renting the ballroom at the Marriott downtown. Mom obsessed over every detail from the imported orchid centerpieces to the string quartet that would play during cocktail hour. 3 weeks before that terrible dinner at Romano's, everything changed. I was debugging a particularly complex security algorithm when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. "Is this Darren Matthews?" The voice belonged to someone older professional with an urgency that immediately grabbed my attention. "Yes, this is Darren." "Mr. Matthews, my name is James Chen, Chief Technology Officer at Meridian Financial Services. We've experienced a serious security breach, and your name came up as someone who might be able to help us. We need immediate assistance." I nearly dropped the phone. Meridian Financial was a Fortune 500 company with over $2 billion in assets under management. How had they even heard of me? "I'm not sure I understand," I managed to say. "6 months ago, you identified vulnerabilities in the university network and provided detailed reports on how to fix them. Our security consultant reviewed your work and said it was the most thorough analysis he'd ever seen. We're willing to pay $50,000 for emergency consultation if you can help us recover from this attack." $50,000. That was more money than I'd ever imagined earning, let alone in a single job. While my parents argued downstairs about whether to take out a second mortgage to pay for Emma's wedding, I was being offered enough money to buy a new car. "When do you need me to start?" I asked. The Meridian financial crisis became my introduction to the high-stakes world of corporate cybersecurity. I drove to their downtown headquarters that same night, walking past marble columns and crystal chandeliers into a war room where executives were frantically trying to understand what had happened to their systems. The ransomware attack had encrypted their entire customer database. Hackers were demanding $3 million in Bitcoin, threatening to publish sensitive financial records if their demands weren't met by midnight. The FBI had been called, but their cybercrime unit wouldn't arrive until morning. Meanwhile, every hour of downtime was costing Meridian hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost business. I spent the first 4 hours analyzing their network architecture, tracing the attack vector back to its source. The hackers had exploited a vulnerability in their email server, but that was just the entry point. They'd spent weeks moving laterally through the system, mapping out valuable data and installing backdoors. Working through the night, I discovered something the hackers hadn't expected. Their encryption had a flaw, a small mathematical error in how they'd implemented their algorithm. Most security experts would have missed it, but I'd studied similar attacks during my late-night garage sessions. Within 18 hours, I developed a decryption tool that recovered 97% of their data without paying a single dollar in ransom. The CEO, Margaret Wilson, called me into her office the next morning. She was a woman in her 50s who'd built Meridian from a small regional firm into a national powerhouse. "Darren," she said, looking exhausted but relieved, "you've saved our company. What you accomplished in 18 hours would have taken our regular IT team months to figure out." She handed me a check for $50,000, but that wasn't the end of our conversation. "I want to offer you an exclusive contract," she continued. $200,000 annually to serve as our primary cybersecurity consultant. You'd work remotely, set your own schedule, but we'd have priority access to your expertise. $200,000. I stared at the contract, trying to process what was happening. 6 months earlier, my parents had been disappointed that I couldn't find a part-time job at the local electronics store. Now I was being offered more money than my father made in his accounting practice. I signed the contract that afternoon and drove home in a daze. Emma was in the kitchen planning menu options for her wedding reception, surrounded by catering brochures and color-coded spreadsheets. She looked up as I walked in, flour smudged on her cheek from testing cake recipes. "How was your job interview?" she asked with genuine concern. I told my parents I was meeting with a local computer repair shop about a technician position. It went well, I said simply, tucking the contract into my jacket pocket. Over the next month, word spread through Meridian's network of business connections. Margaret Wilson mentioned my work to colleagues at industry conferences, and my phone started ringing with requests for consultation. I helped a healthcare system in Chicago recover from a data breach designed security protocols for a manufacturing company in Detroit, and even assisted a small bank in rural Ohio with updating their digital infrastructure. Each project taught me something new about the cybersecurity landscape. I realized that most companies were using outdated protection systems, relying on software that had been developed years earlier and couldn't keep up with modern threats. There was a massive gap in the market for innovative security solutions. That's when I decided to establish my own company. I hired a business attorney downtown, a sharp woman named Patricia Rodriguez, who specialized in technology startups. We spent hours structuring the business entity, discussing liability protection and growth strategies. I named the company Secure Core Solutions, reflecting our mission to protect the essential systems that businesses depended on. My first employee was Sarah Mitchell, a marketing specialist who'd recently graduated from the local university with a degree in communications. She was brilliant at explaining complex technical concepts in ways that clients could understand. My second hire was Marcus Thompson, a former MIT professor who'd left academia to work in the private sector. He brought decades of experience and helped me avoid common mistakes that destroyed young companies. We rented a small office space in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy but functional. I installed state-of-the-art computer equipment and created a workspace where brilliant minds could solve challenging problems. The rent was only $1,500 per month, leaving plenty of capital for growth and development. Meanwhile, Emma's wedding preparations were consuming more and more of my parents' attention and financial resources. They hired a wedding planner who charged $8,000 just for coordination services. The dress alone cost $4,000, imported from a designer boutique in New York. Every weekend brought new expenses, engagement photos, venue deposits, floral arrangements that cost more than most people spent on their cars. I watched my parents stress about money while sitting on contracts worth nearly $1 million annually. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. They saw me as their failure son who couldn't hold down a regular job while I was building a business that was generating more revenue than both their careers combined. The breakthrough moment came 8 months after founding Secure Core. David Harrison, a venture capitalist from San Francisco, called after hearing about our work through professional networks. "I've been tracking your company's growth," he said during our first phone conversation. "What you've accomplished in less than a year is remarkable. I'd like to discuss investment opportunities." We met at an upscale coffee shop downtown, and David explained that he specialized in identifying promising technology companies before they became household names. He'd invested in 3 previous cybersecurity firms that had eventually sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. "Your approach is different," he explained. "Most security companies focus on detecting threats after they've already infiltrated systems. You're developing preventive solutions that stop attacks before they happen. That's the future of the industry." He offered to invest $2 million for a 20% stake in Secure Core, valuing my 8-month-old company at $10 million. I nearly choked on my coffee. $10 million. That meant my personal ownership was worth $8 million more money than I could have imagined when I was struggling through thermodynamics homework just 2 years earlier. But I wasn't ready to give up equity yet. Secure Core was growing so rapidly that I wanted to see how far we could go independently. I politely declined David's offer, but agreed to keep in touch as we continued expanding. That night, I lay in bed listening to my parents argue about wedding expenses in the next room. They were discussing whether to take out a second mortgage on the house to cover the remaining costs. Emma's wedding had spiraled into a $60,000 production far beyond what they could afford on their combined income. I could have solved their financial problems with a single phone call, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the need to prove that their assumptions about my life were completely wrong. I decided to wait until I could reveal everything at once to show them not just that I'd succeeded, but that I'd built something truly extraordinary. By the spring of Emma's wedding year, Secure Core Solutions had grown from 3 employees working in a converted warehouse to 15 brilliant minds operating out of a proper office complex. We'd moved into a modern facility with floor-to-ceiling windows, ergonomic workstations, and a conference room equipped with the latest presentation technology. The transformation was remarkable, but my parents remained completely oblivious to what I was building. Our client roster read like a directory of American business success stories. We were protecting hospitals in Texas from ransomware attacks, securing financial institutions in New England against data breaches, and helping government agencies in Washington develop stronger digital defenses. Each contract brought new challenges that pushed our team to innovate faster and think more creatively about cybersecurity solutions. Revenue was approaching $10 million annually, a number that seemed impossible when I was debugging code in our garage just 18 months earlier. Marcus had developed predictive algorithms that could identify potential threats weeks before they materialized. Sarah had built relationships with decision makers at major corporations across the country. Our reputation for solving impossible problems was spreading throughout the business community. The irony of my situation became more pronounced with each passing month. While Emma planned elaborate details for her wedding reception, I was hiring cybersecurity experts with advanced degrees from Stanford and Carnegie Mellon. While my parents stressed about covering the costs of her bridal shower, I was negotiating contracts that would generate more revenue in a single quarter than they earned in an entire year. Competition was emerging as other firms recognized the lucrative potential of our market niche. Larger companies with established reputations were trying to poach our employees with salary offers that doubled their current compensation. IBM had approached Marcus with a position that included stock options and relocation assistance to their headquarters in New York. Microsoft had offered Sarah a marketing director role with a signing bonus of $75,000. I convinced them to stay by offering equity stakes in SecureCore. Marcus received 5% ownership, reflecting his crucial role in developing our core technologies. Sarah received 3%, recognizing her success in building our client relationships. The remaining team members received smaller percentages, but everyone had skin in the game now. We weren't just employees anymore. We were partners, building something significant together. Managing rapid growth presented challenges I'd never anticipated during those early days in the garage. We needed sophisticated project management systems to coordinate multiple contracts simultaneously. We required legal expertise to navigate complex government procurement processes. We needed accounting systems that could handle international payments and multi-year service agreements. I was working 16-hour days, 7 days a week, trying to maintain the quality that had built our reputation while scaling operations to meet increasing demand. There were weeks when I slept in the office, surviving on takeout food and caffeine, while troubleshooting critical security incidents for clients in different time zones. Personal relationships suffered as SecureCore consumed every aspect of my life. I'd turned down invitations to college friends' weddings, missed family holiday gatherings, and essentially disappeared from any social activities that didn't directly relate to work. The sacrifice felt necessary at the time, but I was beginning to understand the hidden costs of entrepreneurial success. Emma's wedding preparations, meanwhile, were reaching fever pitch intensity. Every conversation at family dinners revolved around floral arrangements, seating charts, and menu selections. Mom had transformed our dining room into a command center with binders full of vendor contracts, timeline spreadsheets, and fabric samples for tablecloths. The expenses kept escalating beyond their original budget. The photographer alone was charging $6,000 for the ceremony and reception coverage. The band they'd hired cost $8,000, plus travel expenses since they were flying in from Chicago. The venue required a $15,000 deposit 6 months before the wedding date, money my parents didn't have without dipping into their retirement savings. I watched them make increasingly desperate financial decisions to fund Emma's perfect day. Dad took on extra accounting clients during tax season, working until midnight to generate additional income. Mom started showing houses 7 days a week, even dragging potential buyers through properties on Sundays when she should have been resting. They never asked me for financial help, which wasn't surprising given their perception of my career prospects. In their minds, I was still the college dropout who couldn't find steady employment. They assumed I was barely covering my own expenses, let alone accumulating wealth that could solve their problems. David Harrison called again in March, 6 months after our initial meeting. "I've been watching SecureCore's progress," he said. "Your revenue growth is accelerating faster than we projected. I'd like to discuss a different kind of partnership." We met at his hotel when he flew into town for a technology conference. This time, his proposal wasn't about equity investment. He'd been approached by Tech Global Corporation, a multinational company that specialized in acquiring promising cybersecurity firms and integrating them into their larger operations. "They're offering $45 million for SecureCore," David explained. "You'd retain 20% ownership plus management control, but they'd provide the resources to expand internationally. Think about it: offices in London, Tokyo, Sydney. You could become a global player overnight. $45 million. Even after taxes and distribution to employees with equity stakes, I'd personally receive over $30 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like discussing the national debt rather than my personal bank account. But accepting the acquisition would mean giving up the independence that had allowed SecureCore to innovate so rapidly. Large corporations moved slowly, required extensive approvals for new initiatives, and often stifled the creativity that made small companies successful. I'd seen brilliant startups get absorbed by bigger firms and lose everything that made them special. I asked David for 72 hours to consider the offer and discuss it with my team. That evening, I drove past Emma's bridal shower at the country club, watching through the windows as she opened gifts surrounded by friends and relatives. She looked radiant in a pale blue dress that probably cost more than most people spent on their monthly rent. Inside that building, my parents were celebrating their daughter's success and looking forward to welcoming a wealthy son-in-law into the family. They had no idea that their supposedly failed son was parked outside contemplating a business decision that would make him wealthier than Trevor's entire extended family combined. The cognitive dissonance was becoming unbearable. Every family interaction felt like living a lie, pretending to be someone I wasn't, while they continued treating me like a disappointment. But I'd come too far to reveal everything without making it count. I wanted the moment of truth to be so overwhelming, so undeniable, that it would force them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about success and failure. Marcus and Sarah both encouraged me to accept Tech Global's offer when we met the next morning. $30 million is generational wealth, Marcus pointed out. You could start new companies, invest in other entrepreneurs, make an impact that goes far beyond cybersecurity. Sarah agreed. "You've proven your point," she said. "You built something incredible from nothing. Now it's time to cash in and enjoy the rewards." They were right, but I wasn't ready to make that decision yet. I called David and asked for 2 more weeks to consider the acquisition. He agreed, understanding that selling a company you'd built from scratch wasn't a choice to be made lightly. 2 weeks later, Emma's wedding would force me to confront the growing tension between my secret success and my family's perception of failure. The elaborate ceremony they couldn't afford would finally push me to reveal the truth about what I'd accomplished while they assumed I was wasting my life. Emma's wedding day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance that $85,000 could buy. The ceremony was held at Riverside Manor, a historic estate overlooking the valley, with gardens that had been featured in regional magazines for their spring flower displays. The weather cooperated perfectly with clear skies and temperatures in the mid-70s, exactly what Emma had dreamed of when she'd started planning 2 years earlier. I arrived early to help with last-minute setup, wearing the charcoal gray suit I'd purchased specifically for the occasion. The groomsmen were bustling around in matching navy blazers, adjusting boutonnieres, and practicing their processional timing. Bridesmaids fluttered through the bridal suite upstairs, their rose-colored dresses creating a sea of coordinated elegance. The financial toll of the celebration was visible in every detail. The floral arrangements alone had cost $12,000, featuring imported peonies and garden roses arranged by a designer who'd flown in from Atlanta. The reception tent was draped with ivory silk and illuminated by crystal chandeliers that cast dancing shadows across the manicured lawn. Extended family members had traveled from across the country for the celebration. Aunts and uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, and family friends who'd known Emma since childhood filled the folding chairs arranged in perfect rows facing the altar. As guests mingled during the pre-ceremony reception, I found myself trapped in a series of awkward conversations about my career prospects. "So, Darren, what are you doing for work these days?" asked my father's brother, Uncle Richard, while balancing a champagne flute and appetizer plate. "I'm in cybersecurity consulting," I replied, keeping my answer deliberately vague. "Oh, that's interesting," he said with the tone people use when they don't understand what you've told them. "Is that steady work or more of a freelance situation?" Before I could respond, my cousin Jennifer joined our conversation. "I heard you dropped out of engineering school," she said with the blunt honesty that alcohol tends to encourage. "That must have been difficult for your parents." I smiled politely and excused myself to check on the wedding timeline, but similar conversations followed me throughout the afternoon. Everyone seemed to know about my college departure and assumed it reflected poorly on my character or work ethic. No one asked about what I'd accomplished since leaving university. They simply accepted the narrative that I'd failed to live up to expectations. Emma looked absolutely stunning in her designer wedding gown, a masterpiece of French lace and silk that had required 3 fittings to achieve perfect proportions. The dress cost $4,000, but seeing her radiant smile made it impossible to question whether the expense was justified. This was her moment to feel like a princess, and she deserved every bit of happiness the day could provide. Trevor stood at the altar in his custom-tailored tuxedo, flanked by groomsmen who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. His best man, a fellow investment banker named Bradley, delivered a speech during the reception that highlighted Trevor's accomplishments and praised the Winchester family's tradition of excellence. The implication was clear: Trevor was marrying into a family of successful achievers, with the obvious exception being Emma's underperforming younger brother. The ceremony itself was beautiful, conducted by a minister who'd known Emma since childhood. She spoke about love, commitment, and building a life together based on shared values and mutual support. As I watched Emma exchange vows with Trevor, I felt genuine happiness for her success and the bright future they were planning together. But the financial stress underlying the celebration was impossible to ignore. During a quiet moment, I overheard my parents discussing payment schedules with the caterer. Mom looked exhausted, having worked overtime for months to generate additional income for wedding expenses. Dad's face showed the strain of financial pressure, the worry lines that had deepened since they'd committed to funding such an elaborate event. Their conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing with an urgent call from David Harrison. I stepped away from the reception tent to take the call, privately walking toward the garden area where instrumental music from the string quartet provided cover for our conversation. "Darren, I'm sorry to interrupt your family celebration," David began. "But Tech Global's executive committee met this morning. They're accelerating their acquisition timeline and need a final decision by Monday morning. The $45 million offer is firm, but they won't wait longer than 72 hours for your response. 72 hours. I look back at the wedding reception, watching my parents smile and laugh with relatives while secretly worrying about how they'd pay their credit card bills next month. The irony was overwhelming. I was literally holding a phone call that could solve every financial problem they'd ever face, while they continued treating me like the family disappointment. I understand the time pressure, I told David. Let me discuss it with my team and get back to you Sunday evening. After ending the call, I rejoined the reception just as Emma was preparing to throw her bouquet. Single women gathered on the lawn, laughing and jostling for position, while the photographer captured candid moments. Emma's bouquet sailed through the air, landing in the hands of her college roommate, who immediately blushed and looked toward her boyfriend standing nearby. During dinner, the conversation turned to future plans and career aspirations. Trevor spoke enthusiastically about his promotion to senior associate at the investment bank, explaining how he'd be managing larger portfolios and working with more prestigious clients. Emma discussed her plans to continue working at the law firm even after their honeymoon, at least until they decided to start a family. "What about you, Darren?" asked Trevor's mother, a well-dressed woman who clearly came from old money. "Emma mentioned you're working in computers. That must be an exciting field with all the technological changes happening these days." I could feel my parents' anxious energy across the table, worried that I might say something to embarrass them in front of Trevor's accomplished family. "It's definitely a rapidly evolving industry," I replied diplomatically. "There are a lot of opportunities for people who understand emerging technologies." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I noticed how carefully my parents had avoided mentioning my work throughout the entire evening. When introducing me to their friends, they simply said, "This is our son Darren," without any reference to my career or achievements. The omission spoke volumes about their expectations and assumptions. As the evening wound down, Emma made an unexpected announcement during the final toast. Standing beside Trevor with tears of joy in her eyes, she tapped her champagne glass to get everyone's attention. "Trevor and I have some additional news to share," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet reception tent. "We're expecting our first child this winter." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. My parents looked absolutely ecstatic, immediately surrounding Emma and Trevor with hugs and congratulations. Dad's eyes were misty as he talked about becoming a grandfather, while Mom started making plans for converting the spare bedroom into a nursery. "This baby will continue our family's legacy of excellence," Dad announced proudly, raising his glass for one final toast. We couldn't be more thrilled about welcoming the next generation. I joined the celebration, genuinely happy for Emma and Trevor's growing family, but the comment about legacy of excellence stung more than usual. Standing there watching my parents embrace their successful daughter and son-in-law, I realized that nothing I accomplished would ever change their fundamental perception of who I was. They'd written me off as a failure, and no amount of success would rewrite that narrative unless I forced them to confront the truth directly. As guests began departing and vendors started cleaning up, I helped load wedding gifts into cars and said goodbye to relatives I wouldn't see for another few years. The evening had been beautiful and memorable, exactly what Emma had dreamed of when she'd started planning her perfect day. But driving home that night, I made a decision about Tech Global's acquisition offer. If my parents were going to continue treating me like a disappointment while struggling financially to maintain appearances, it was time to reveal the truth about what I'd built while they assumed I was wasting my life. The next 72 hours would change everything. The 48 hours following Emma's wedding felt like the longest weekend of my life. I spent Saturday morning at SecureCore's office, even though it was supposed to be a day off, trying to think clearly about Tech Global's acquisition offer. The building was empty except for the security guard, giving me space to consider a decision that would fundamentally change my relationship with money work and family expectations. Marcus arrived around noon, finding me staring at financial projections spread across the conference room table. "You know we support whatever choice you make," he said, settling into the chair across from me. But $45 million represents security for everyone involved: your employees, your family, your future. He was right about the security aspect. Accepting the acquisition would mean guaranteed financial stability, not just for me, but for the 15 people who'd helped build SecureCore into something special. Each employee with equity stakes would receive life-changing payouts. Sarah would earn enough money to start her own marketing consultancy. Marcus could retire comfortably or pursue research projects without worrying about funding. But selling the company would also mean giving up control over the innovation that had made us successful. Tech Global was known for acquiring smaller firms and gradually integrating them into standardized corporate processes. The creativity and agility that allowed SecureCore to develop cutting-edge solutions might disappear under layers of bureaucratic oversight. Sarah joined us that afternoon bringing coffee and her characteristic optimism about complex business decisions. "I've been thinking about your situation with your parents," she said. "Maybe the acquisition could be an opportunity to reset those relationships. You'd have the financial resources to help them without creating awkward dependency issues." Her observation hit close to home. My parents were struggling financially in ways they were too proud to admit openly. The wedding had depleted their savings account and maxed out their credit cards. Dad's accounting practice was solid but not growing, while Mom's real estate income fluctuated with market conditions. They were approaching their 60s without adequate retirement funds, a reality that would become more pressing with each passing year. Meanwhile, I was sitting on a business worth tens of millions of dollars while watching them stress about monthly mortgage payments. The guilt was becoming unbearable, especially after witnessing their exhaustion during Emma's wedding preparations. They'd sacrificed financially to give their daughter a perfect celebration while assuming their son couldn't contribute anything meaningful to family stability. That evening, I drove past our neighborhood and noticed the subtle signs of financial strain around my parents' house. The landscaping looked tired compared to previous years when they'd hired professional gardeners to maintain elaborate flower beds. Dad's car had a dent in the rear bumper that he hadn't bothered to repair, probably because the insurance deductible seemed too expensive for cosmetic damage. The contrast with Emma and Trevor's situation was stark. They'd just returned from a honeymoon in Europe that cost $25,000, posting photos from five-star hotels in Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. Trevor's investment banking salary provided comfortable financial cushioning, while Emma's law firm position guaranteed steady income growth. They were starting their married life with advantages my parents had never enjoyed at that age. Sunday morning brought another call from David Harrison checking on my decision timeline. "Tech Global's board meets first thing Monday morning," he reminded me. "They're prepared to wire $45 million into escrow accounts by Tuesday if you accept their terms." This kind of opportunity doesn't come along often, especially for companies as young as SecureCore. I asked him to review the acquisition terms one more time, focusing on the management structure and operational independence clauses. Tech Global would provide resources for international expansion access to enterprise clients and corporate infrastructure support. In exchange, they'd expect integration with their existing security platform and adherence to standardized development processes. The deal made financial sense, but something felt incomplete about accepting it, while my parents remained oblivious to what I'd accomplished. They'd spent 2 years assuming I was wasting my potential missing opportunities to build a meaningful career. Revealing my success after selling the company would feel hollow, like admitting I'd needed external validation to prove my worth. Sunday afternoon, I received an unexpected visit from my parents. They appeared at my apartment door looking older and more tired than usual, carrying the weight of post-wedding financial reality. Mom's smile seemed forced, while Dad avoided making direct eye contact. "We hope you enjoyed Emma's wedding." Mom began settling onto my couch with obvious reluctance. It turned out beautifully despite all the stress and planning involved. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Actually, we came by because we need to discuss something important. The wedding expenses ended up being higher than we anticipated, and were facing some temporary cash flow challenges. My heart started racing as I realized what was happening. They were asking their supposedly unemployed son for financial help, still unaware that I had millions of dollars in business assets. The irony was so intense it felt surreal. We were wondering if you might be able to lend us $15,000 to cover some immediate expenses. Dad continued, his voice strained with embarrassment. We'll pay you back with interest once Mom's real estate commissions pick up this fall. $15,000. I was literally holding signed acquisition documents that would net me over $30 million, while my parents were asking to borrow an amount I could cover with a single client payment. They were sitting in my living room, treating me like their last resort for financial help, completely oblivious to the resources I'd accumulated while they assumed I was failing at life. We know money is probably tight for you too, Mom added quickly. But we didn't know who else to ask. Emma and Trevor are still paying off their honeymoon, and we don't want to burden them with our financial problems. I stared at my parents, processing the surreal nature of our conversation. They were protecting Emma from their money troubles while asking me, their supposedly unsuccessful child, to solve their financial crisis. Meanwhile, I was holding the power to not only solve their immediate problems, but to set them up for comfortable retirement if I chose to reveal the truth. Can you give me a day to figure out my finances? I asked, buying time to decide how to handle the revelation I'd been postponing for 2 years. After they left, I sat in my apartment, holding Tech Global's acquisition offer and thinking about the choice I faced. I could accept their money, solve my parents' problems quietly, and continue living the lie they'd constructed about my career. Or I could use this moment to reveal everything, forcing them to confront their assumptions about success and failure. The decision about Tech Global's offer suddenly became clear. I didn't need their validation or their money to prove what I'd accomplished. SecureCore was successful because of innovation and hard work, not because a large corporation had deemed it worthy of acquisition. I could continue growing the company independently while using this crisis to reset my relationship with my parents. That evening, I called David Harrison with my decision. I'm declining Tech Global's offer, I told him. SecureCore isn't ready to be absorbed into a larger organization. We're going to continue growing independently and see how far we can push our innovation. David sounded surprised but respectful. I think you're making a mistake financially, but I admire your commitment to independence. If you change your mind in the future, opportunities like this might not be available. After hanging up, I started planning how to reveal the truth to my parents. They'd asked for financial help, which gave me the perfect opening to explain where I'd been getting my money for the past 2 years. Tomorrow, I would show them SecureCore's financial statements, client contracts, and business projections. The conversation would be difficult, but it was time to stop pretending to be someone I wasn't. The next morning, I called my parents and asked them to meet me at SecureCore's office. I want to show you something that might change your perspective on my career situation, I told them. They agreed reluctantly, probably expecting another disappointing conversation about my job prospects. But this time, I was going to show them exactly what their dropout son had built while they assumed he was wasting his life. I spent Monday morning preparing for the most important conversation of my life. SecureCore's conference room became my staging area, with financial statements, client contracts, and business awards arranged on the polished oak table. The annual revenue reports showed our growth from zero to nearly $10 million in less than 2 years. The client list included Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and international corporations. The employee roster demonstrated how we'd grown from 3 people working in a garage to 15 cybersecurity experts with advanced degrees. My parents arrived at 11 o'clock looking around our modern office space with obvious confusion. They'd expected to meet at a coffee shop or my apartment, not at a professional facility with floor-to-ceiling windows and state-of-the-art computer equipment. Mom's eyes widened as she took in the sophisticated workstations and multiple monitors displaying complex security algorithms. This is where you work, Dad asked, his voice carrying surprise and uncertainty. This is where I've been working for the past 2 years, I replied, guiding them toward the conference room. Please have a seat. I want to show you something important. Emma and Trevor arrived 10 minutes later, having driven over from their new apartment downtown. I'd called them the night before, explaining that I needed to have a family meeting about my career situation. Emma looked curious but concerned, probably expecting another conversation about my need to find stable employment. Thank you all for coming. I began standing at the head of the conference table while my family settled into leather chairs. I asked you here because I need to clarify some misconceptions about what I've been doing since leaving college. I started with the basics, explaining how I'd discovered my passion for cybersecurity during my engineering studies and made the decision to pursue that interest instead of completing a degree I didn't care about. My parents' faces showed the familiar mixture of disappointment and resignation they displayed countless times when discussing my educational choices. I know you've been worried about my career prospects, I continued, and I understand why my decision to leave college seemed irresponsible. But I want to show you what I've accomplished during the time you thought I was wasting my life. I handed them SecureCore's latest financial statement, watching their expressions change as they processed the numbers. Annual revenue of $9.8 million, net profit margin of 37%, projected growth rate of 150% for the following year. I don't understand, Mom said, studying the document with growing confusion. What does this have to do with you? I founded this company, I replied simply. I own 87% of SecureCore Solutions. These are my financial statements. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Dad's face went completely blank as he reread the revenue figures. Emma's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Trevor leaned forward to examine the client list, his investment banking background helping him understand the significance of the corporate names. $9.8 million, Dad repeated slowly, in annual revenue. That's correct. We've signed contracts worth over $12 million for next year, and we're considering expansion into international markets. I walked them through our major client relationships, explaining how we developed innovative security solutions that protected some of America's largest companies from cyber attacks. I showed them testimonial letters from CEOs praising our work industry awards, recognizing our technical innovations, and media articles that had featured SecureCore as a rising star in the cybersecurity field. Emma finally found her voice. How long has this been going on? I started developing the core technology while you were planning your wedding. I incorporated the company 8 months after leaving college. We've been growing rapidly ever since. The weight of revelation was settling over them like a heavy blanket. For 2 years, they'd assumed I was unemployed or working low-paying jobs while struggling to find direction. They'd worried about my future, made excuses for my choices, and treated me like the family disappointment. Meanwhile, I'd been building a multi-million-dollar business that was revolutionizing how companies protected themselves from digital threats. Why didn't you tell us? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you'd already decided I was a failure, I replied honestly. Every conversation about my career was met with lectures about responsibility and practical choices. You never asked what I was actually doing. You just assumed it wasn't important. Dad's face was cycling through emotions I couldn't quite identify. Shock, confusion, and something that might have been pride were competing for dominance in his expression. You're telling us that you've built a $10 million company in 2 years, $9.8 million in current annual revenue, but yes. And yesterday, I turned down a $45 million acquisition offer because I believe we can grow even larger independently. Trevor spoke for the first time since arriving. $45 million. You turned down $45 million? I turned down $45 million in total acquisition value. My personal stake would have been approximately $31 million after taxes and employee distributions. The numbers seemed too large for them to process immediately. We sat in silence for several minutes while they absorbed the magnitude of what I'd revealed. Emma was staring at the financial statements like they were written in a foreign language. Dad was calculating figures in his head, his accountant's mind, trying to verify the numbers. I need to ask you about something else. I continued, deciding to address their recent financial request directly. Yesterday, you asked me to lend you $15,000 for wedding expenses. You were worried about burdening Emma with your financial problems, so you came to your unemployed son for help. Dad's face flushed with embarrassment as he realized the irony of their situation. They'd asked their supposedly broke child to bail them out financially, while that same child was sitting on millions of dollars in business assets. The truth is, I could have solved your financial problems with a phone call at any point during the past year. I've been watching you stress about money while I had the resources to eliminate every worry you've ever had about retirement mortgages or wedding expenses. Mom started crying, though I couldn't tell if the tears were from relief, frustration, or some combination of complex emotions. We had no idea, she managed to say. We thought you were throwing your life away. Emma leaned back in her chair, processing the reality that her supposedly unsuccessful younger brother had built something larger than anything she could have imagined. I feel like such an idiot, she said. All those times I tried to give you career advice, you were already more successful than anyone in our family has ever been. The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. I explained how their constant comparisons and dismissive comments had affected me, how isolating it felt to achieve success while being treated like a failure. They acknowledged their mistakes and apologized for making assumptions about my choices without understanding what I was actually accomplishing. Dad finally spoke with genuine emotion in his voice. I'm proud of what you've built, son. I'm ashamed that I didn't support you better, but I'm incredibly proud of your success. But the most surprising moment came when Emma broke down completely, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to speak. I need to tell you something, she said between sobs. This pregnancy wasn't planned. Trevor and I are terrified about the financial responsibility. His student loans are enormous. My law firm salary is good but not great. And we have no idea how we're going to afford childcare and save for the baby's future. She continued, her voice shaking with vulnerability I'd never heard from her before. I've been pretending everything is perfect because that's what everyone expects from me. But I'm scared, Darren. I'm scared that we're going to struggle financially and disappoint everyone who thinks we have our lives figured out. The admission transformed everything about our family dynamics. Emma, the golden child who'd never failed at anything, was asking for understanding and support from the brother she'd assumed was unsuccessful. The reversal was complete and overwhelming. Can you forgive me for being so condescending? She asked. And can you help us figure out how to manage our finances better? I looked around the conference room at my family's faces, seeing genuine emotion and vulnerability for the first time in years. They finally understood what I'd accomplished, but more importantly, they were ready to rebuild our relationships based on honesty instead of assumptions. Of course I forgive you, I told Emma. And yes, I'll help with whatever you need. We're family. 6 months after revealing SecureCore's success to my family, our relationships had transformed in ways I never could have imagined during those difficult years when they viewed me as a disappointment. The conference room conversation had marked the beginning of genuine healing. But the real work of rebuilding trust and understanding happened gradually through countless smaller interactions over the following months. My parents' financial stress disappeared almost immediately after I insisted on paying off their mortgage and wedding-related debts. The relief on their faces was worth every dollar spent, and watching them regain their confidence was incredibly rewarding. Dad started enjoying his accounting work again without the constant pressure of financial worry, while Mom reduced her real estate schedule to focus on activities she actually enjoyed. But more importantly, they began showing genuine interest in SecureCore's operations and my role in the cybersecurity industry. Dad started reading trade publications to understand the technical challenges we faced, while Mom attended a cybersecurity conference where I was speaking on a panel about emerging threats. Their pride was authentic, now based on understanding rather than obligation. Emma's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. Once she stopped feeling pressure to be perfect, she revealed vulnerability and depth that had been hidden behind her achievement-oriented facade. We started having regular lunch meetings where she could discuss her fears about parenthood and financial responsibility without judgment. Our relationship evolved from competitive comparison to genuine partnership. I helped Emma and Trevor create a comprehensive financial plan that would allow them to raise their child comfortably while building long-term wealth. Trevor's initial awkwardness around me disappeared once he realized I wasn't interested in showing off my success or making him feel inadequate. Instead, we developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared interests in business strategy. The cybersecurity industry had taken notice of SecureCore's rapid growth and innovative approaches to threat prevention. We were featured on the cover of Cybersecurity Weekly magazine as one of the most promising young companies in America. The article highlighted our employee-focused culture, cutting-edge technology, and impressive client retention rates. Speaking engagements became a regular part of my schedule, sharing insights about entrepreneurship and technical innovation at conferences across the country. The recognition was gratifying, but more importantly, it helped establish SecureCore's reputation as a thought leader in the rapidly evolving security landscape. Universities started inviting me to lecture about cybersecurity careers, which felt like meaningful payback for the educational establishment I'd left behind. Our team continued expanding as demand for our services outpaced our capacity to deliver them. We hired specialists in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and international regulatory compliance. The office space doubled in size, accommodating 37 employees who were collectively protecting billions of dollars in digital assets for our clients. Marcus received recognition from MIT for his contributions to cybersecurity research, validating his decision to leave academia for the private sector. Sarah launched her own marketing consultancy while maintaining an advisory role with SecureCore, helping other technology companies tell their stories effectively. The success of my early employees proved that our equity-sharing model had created genuine opportunities for everyone involved. Financial success allowed me to pursue interests beyond cybersecurity for the first time in years. I started taking piano lessons, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for during the company's frantic growth phase. I began traveling for pleasure rather than business, visiting national parks and cultural sites that had been on my wish list since college. Most significantly, my relationship with Sarah evolved from professional collaboration to romantic partnership. We'd worked together for 2 years, developing mutual respect and understanding that gradually deepened into something more personal. She understood the demands of building a technology company because she'd lived through the experience alongside me. Our relationship felt natural and unforced, built on shared values rather than external pressures. We purchased a modest house in a quiet neighborhood near my parents, close enough for regular family interactions, but independent enough to maintain our own space and privacy. The house had a home office where I could work remotely when necessary, along with a garden where Sarah could pursue her hobby of growing vegetables and herbs. Family gatherings became genuinely enjoyable rather than exercises in avoiding awkward conversations about career prospects. Emma's son was born healthy and beautiful, making my parents grandparents for the first time. Watching Dad read bedtime stories and Mom organize elaborate photo shoots reminded me that their love had always been unconditional, even when their understanding was limited. The baby brought new energy to family dynamics, giving a shared focus on someone else's development rather than dwelling on past misunderstandings. I set up education savings accounts and started planning technology gifts that would encourage early interest in science and mathematics. Emma joked that her son would probably be programming computers before he learned to walk, given his uncle's influence. Professional recognition continued growing as SecureCore's innovations gained industry attention. We received contracts with international corporations seeking to protect their operations from increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. The company's valuation reached $75 million according to independent assessments, far exceeding what Tech Global had offered during their acquisition attempt. But the most satisfying aspect of our success was the impact we were having on digital security across multiple industries. Healthcare systems could protect patient records more effectively. Financial institutions could safeguard customer accounts against fraud. Government agencies could defend critical infrastructure from foreign interference. Our work was making a real difference in protecting American businesses and citizens from digital threats. The journey from college dropout to successful entrepreneur had taught me valuable lessons about persistence, innovation, and the importance of staying true to personal convictions, even when others question your choices. Building SecureCore required technical skills, but sustaining its growth demanded emotional resilience and unwavering belief in our mission. My parents often expressed regret about their initial reaction to my college departure and their years of treating me like a disappointment. I assured them that their skepticism had actually motivated me to work harder and prove myself more thoroughly than I might have otherwise. Their doubts had forced me to develop thick skin and internal confidence that served me well during difficult periods of business development. Looking back, I realized that success isn't just about achieving financial milestones or professional recognition. True success involves building meaningful relationships, contributing to something larger than personal ambition, and maintaining perspective about what really matters in life. The money was wonderful, but the respect and understanding I'd earned from my family was equally valuable. As I sat in my home office one evening reviewing SecureCore's latest quarterly results, while Sarah prepared dinner in the kitchen, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 3 years. The college dropout, who'd been dismissed as a failure, was now leading a company that employed nearly 40 people and protected some of America's most important digital infrastructure. But the transformation I was most proud of wasn't visible in financial statements or industry awards. It was the genuine happiness I felt during family gatherings, the authentic relationships I'd built with colleagues and friends, and the confidence that came from knowing I'd stayed true to my convictions despite external pressure to conform. The story of building SecureCore had started with pain and rejection, but it ended with understanding reconciliation and hope for the future. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't achieved through external validation, but through internal growth and the courage to pursue your own definition of success. Now, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever been in a situation where your family or friends doubted your choices, but you knew deep down you were on the right path? What kept you going during those difficult times when the people closest to you couldn't see your vision? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience might inspire someone else who's facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to let me know it connected with your own experiences. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming adversity and proving that unconventional paths can lead to extraordinary outcomes. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need encouragement to pursue their dreams despite skepticism from others. Thank you for listening to my journey from family disappointment to entrepreneurial success. I hope it reminds you that sometimes the people who believe in us least are simply waiting for us to prove what we're truly capable of achieving. Keep building your dreams no matter who questions your direction along the way.